At 1000 hours local time, this Ukrainian MiG-29 crossed the front line at Kherson at 50 feet to take out a grain silo the Russians had repurposed into a drone command and control center. While the mission had been relatively quiet so far, this would all change in a matter of seconds. Unknown to the MiG-29, a Russian Igla from a checkpoint directly ahead had the aircraft in its sight and let loose a missile. Smoke trail corkscrewing up, missile already turning, seeker locked onto its engines. The pilot yanked hard left, then harder right into the missile's previous path, forcing an overshoot. But this was just the first one. 3 more launches within 4 seconds. Different vectors. Russian troops were firing without lock tones, hoping proximity would compensate. The pilot's SPO-15 Barrages radar warner stayed silent. These Soviet systems can't detect passive infrared missiles, only radar-guided threats. Like a smoke detector that can't detect actual fire, only smoke. The rising smoke plumes were his only warning as 3 missiles tried to converge on him simultaneously. The pilot entered a maximum brake turn, 9 Gs crushing him into the seat. The missiles couldn't match it. All 3 overshot harmlessly, but those launch plumes just sent up giant smoke signals visible for 20 miles. Every Russian position from here to Crimea now knew exactly where to look. He dove back 50 feet, threading above power lines at 540 knots ground speed. The radar altimeter screamed warnings. Minimum settings showed 50 feet, but actual clearance varied between 20 and 80 feet over the terrain. One moment of inattention meant becoming a very expensive lawn dart. This was nap of Earth flying at its most extreme, using terrain to break radar line of sight every 8 to 10 seconds. Powerline corridors guaranteed no surprise obstacles, but then flying so low that rooftop manpads teams could look down at him. More Iglas launching ahead, Russians firing over the shoulder, launching behind his path hoping he'd fly through the missile's acquisition basket. Each evasive maneuver burned 200 pounds of fuel from his 7,000-pound internal capacity. Simple math, 35 more hard turns like that and he'd be walking home. His plane's navigation system was useless this low. Pure memorized waypoints on his Mark I eyeballs were the only things keeping him from becoming one with the Ukrainian countryside. Though he was successfully winning the world's deadliest game of dodgeball, a P-18 spoon rest radar was getting intermittent returns. This Vietnam-era beast operates in the VHF band at 150 to 170 megahertz, wavelengths that penetrate terrain better than modern X-band radars. Kind of like how you can hear the bass of your neighbor's music, but not the voice. The operator was starting to notice a pattern in the fleeting contacts, already alerting a Pantsir crew 12 kilometers ahead about the probable route, if he could even make it through this next swarm of Iglas. The newest inbound Iglas could see both near-IR and mid-IR signatures, designed specifically to resist flares. His 30mm chaff flare dispensers held only 60 cartridges total. He'd already used 6. The math was getting worse by the second. Another checkpoint ahead tried their luck, but firing at a jet doing 540 knots from a standing start was like trying to hit a bullet with a rock. The missile went stupid immediately, corkscrewing into a field. Banking hard around a radio tower, the pilot checked his 6. Clear for now, but more smoke trails were rising from positions he'd just passed. They were calling ahead, vectoring every air defense asset toward his probable route. The entire occupied territory was waking up like he'd just kicked an anthill. His SPO-15 threat receiver started chirping, search radars coming online, painting him, trying to establish track. In minutes, every SAM system within 50 miles would know exactly where he was. But first, he had to survive the next 30 seconds as another Manpads team appeared on a factory roof. Missile already leaving the rail, and he was out of maneuvering room between the power lines. The factory roof Igla forced him up to 200 feet. Dangerous exposure, but better than eating a missile. The SPO-15 threat display immediately exploded with contacts, multiple radar systems painting him across different frequency bands, each spike representing a different threat. The Pantsir's 1 RS-2E radar was switching between search mode with its 40-kilometer range umbrella and track mode at 20 kilometers, trying to lock him down for a shot. Search mode was like a lighthouse sweeping around, track mode like a spotlight locked on. The moment it switched to track, he'd have seconds before missile launch. The The pilot executed a notch filter maneuver, turning perpendicular to the Pantsir's radar beam. But when you're moving sideways relative to Doppler radar, your signature matches ground clutter. You essentially disappear into background noise. But this meant deviating from his planned route, adding miles and burning fuel he couldn't spare. Every defensive maneuver was a trade-off between surviving the next threat and having enough gas to make it home. As the pilot was trying to dip, duck, dive, and dodge missiles, the Russians were setting up a classic SAM trap. The old P-18 VHF radar would flush him out, its long wavelengths penetrating terrain impossible to hide from. Then the X-band fire control radars would engage. It's like using a tracking dog to find someone, then sending in attack dogs for the finishing move. Meanwhile, a Tor M2 system was warming up from a cold start. These things need 3 full minutes to boot up their 9A331 electronically steered array. Once online, it could track 48 targets simultaneously and engage 4 at once. He'd be flying right into its engagement envelope in less than 2 minutes. If things weren't bad enough already, the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system joined the party, beginning GPS jamming across the L1 and L2 bands at 1575 and 1227 MHz. The pilot watched his GPS receiver flicker, 8 satellites dropping to 5, then 4. The JDAM needed 8 satellites for optimal accuracy, giving it a circular error probability of less than 5 meters. With only 4 satellites, that might balloon to 30 meters, the difference between hitting the building and hitting the parking lot. But Ukrainian engineers had anticipated Russian electronic warfare tactics. Their modified JDAM-ER had an enhanced inertial navigation system using ring laser gyroscopes. Even without any GPS, it could maintain 10-meter accuracy for 2 minutes, basically remembering exactly where it started from and calculating every tiny moment since. Time to check the weapon. The pilot switched his stores management system to BIT, built-in test. Data flowed through the interface of the Ukrainian modified pylon. This wasn't supposed to work. American weapons on Soviet jets? But Ukrainian engineers had basically hot-wired a USB connection between incompatible systems. GPS data uploaded, telling the bomb where all the satellites were right now. INS gyroscope spun up. Battery showed 27 minutes of power, though it only needed 90 seconds for a 40-mile glide. All green lights. Programming the backup impact mode took 3 switch throws. If GPS failed completely, the JDAM would use barometric pressure and inertial navigation only. Less accurate, but still better than nothing. He adjusted release parameters for atmospheric conditions: 5-knot headwind at altitude, standard temperature, pressure 29.92. The bomb's computer would factor all of this into its glide path calculations. 30 seconds into the initial point. After this, he was committed. No abort, no alternatives. The Tor M2 would be fully online in 45 seconds. He'd have to climb into its engagement envelope, release the weapon, and somehow survive the egress. The pilot took one deep breath, checked his remaining flares, 48 left, and prepared to point his jet at the sky. Behind him, the entire Russian air defense network was coming online. Radars sweeping, missiles spinning up, all focused on one Ukrainian MiG about to ruin their morning. The initial point hit the jet like a sledgehammer. The pilot pulled the stick into his stomach, crushing himself with 5 Gs as the MiG's nose went vertical. Twin RD-33 engines roared to full afterburner. 36,600 pounds of combined thrust turning the fighter into a rocket. The aircraft climbed at 280 meters per second initial rate, altimeter spinning like a slot machine. This was the high-speed yo-yo profile, converting 540 knots of forward speed into altitude like a roller coaster using momentum to climb that first big hill. The SPO-15's audio warning changed from the searching weep-weep to the solid tone every fighter pilot has nightmares about. The Tor M2 had achieved track lock. Through the HUD, he could see his airspeed slackening off as altitude increased. 480 knots, 420, 380. He needed to reach 15,000 feet before hitting 180 knots, which was the stall speed when carrying stores. The math was brutal. He had exactly 4 seconds in the release window at this climb rate. Too early and the JDAM wouldn't have enough energy for its 40-mile glide. too late, and he'd stall with a missile inbound. The Tor M2 launched. The pilot didn't see it, but the SBO-15 screamed the news. 9 M331 missile airborne, accelerating to 850 meters per second. With its 15-kilometer range and 10-kilometer altitude ceiling, intercept in 11 seconds. JDAM release in 6 seconds. He kept the stick buried in his lap, fighting every instinct to maneuver. The weapon needed stable flight for clean separation, or it might tumble instead of gliding. Passing through 12,000 feet, airspeed down to 250 knots. The missile was boring in, its command guidance link with the ground radar updating its intercept solution 10 times per second. The Russian operator was good, keeping the lock despite the MiG's near vertical altitude, 13,000 feet, 220 knots now. The stall warning system started chirping, getting close to the edge of controlled flight. 14,000 feet, 200 knots, almost there. At exactly 15,000 feet and 185 knots, the pilot pickled the JDAM. The pickle button sent 28 bolts through the store's management system to the pylon. Explosive bolts fired with a distinctive thunk he could feel through the airframe. The 500-pound bomb fell away, initially tumbling. Then its GPS receiver acquired satellites, and the flight control computer took over. Gas generators deployed the diamond-shaped wings with a puff of white smoke. The weapon immediately began its 40-mile glide toward the grain elevator where Russian drone operators were conducting their morning strikes against Kherson. But the pilot couldn't celebrate yet. He needed 2 more seconds of predictable flight for clean separation. 2 seconds of that felt like hours with a missile closing at twice the speed of sound. 1001, 1002. Separation confirmed. Now he could fight. Rolling inverted, he pulled through into a split S defense, diving hard back toward Earth. 6 BOL chaff cartridges fired from the dispensers, blooming into a 100-meter-wide cloud of radar-reflective aluminum strips. The 9 M331 missile used command guidance until terminal phase. The ground radar had to maintain lock to steer it. The pilot's sudden dive created a Doppler notch. Radio velocity relative to the radar approached 0, making him vanish from their screen like a ghost. The Russian operator switched to his optical backup channel, trying to manually guide the missile through the chaff using a TV camera. But it was like playing the world's deadliest video game with a massive lag while someone threw tinfoil at your screen. The pilot timed his dive perfectly, putting the missile above him just as its proximity fuse armed at 500 meters. The weapon detonated 300 meters away, close enough that the warhead sent tungsten fragments everywhere. One fragment punched through the port engine compressor section with a sound like a hammer hitting a bell. Exhaust gas temperature immediately spiked into the red. The pilot throttled back to idle, then shut down the damaged engine completely. Fire warning lights stayed off. Good news. But he just lost half his thrust 40 miles behind enemy lines. The MiG-29 was designed by engineers who assumed everything would break eventually. Single-engine flight was completely doable, but just not ideal when everyone and their mother is trying to take you down. The MiG screamed over Hola Pristan at 800 feet and the entire city erupted. Every Zu-23 anti-aircraft position opened up simultaneously. Twin 23mm autocannons pumping out 950 rounds per minute each. The Russians were using barrage fire technique, not aiming at where the plane was, but creating walls of steel where they calculated it would be. It's like shooting skeet, except the clay pigeon is doing 500 knots and actively trying not to die. Every 5th round was a tracer. They looked like those Star Wars laser effects from the movies, but in real life, they would mean a projectile bigger than your thumb is screaming towards you at twice the speed of sound. The Russians had set up an ambush flak trap, holding fire until he was committed to his exit route with no room to maneuver. Smart tactical thinking, but the pilot had one advantage. He was flying through his own sonic boom. The overpressure wave disrupted optical sights, making everything shimmer like a desert mirage. Gunners were trying to aim through constantly distorting air. Their shots were going wide. Then he started jinking, random 2-3G turns every 2 seconds to defeat tracking solutions. On 2 engines, this would be routine. On one engine with degrading hydraulics, it was like trying to do surgery while riding a mechanical bull. The yellow hydraulic warning light had been on since the shrapnel hit. Now it turned red. Primary hydraulic system failure. The backup system engaged automatically but only provided 30% control authority. Every control input now required massive stick and rudder movement. Every movement just got 10 times harder. 23mm rounds started connecting. The distinctive sound of metal punching through aluminum skin filled the cockpit. The pilot compensated with rudder and differential thrust, except he only had one engine. Every system failure cascaded into another problem. The aircraft was becoming harder to control with each hit. Through the chaos, he could see Ukrainian territory ahead, maybe 35 miles. The MiG was barely responding to controls, but it was still flying because Soviet engineers built these things like flying tanks. Triple redundancy in everything gave the pilot the ability to fly with half the aircraft shot away. Behind him, 40 miles back, the JDAM-ER was in its terminal dive at 287 meters per second. The drone operators in the grain elevator had just 3 more seconds to get out of Dodge. The weapon's FMU-152 joint programmable fuse was set to delay mode. It would penetrate deep before detonating. The bomb hit the center support column at over 600 miles per hour. It punched through it like paper and then through 2 more floors of concrete and steel. Then it detonated. 445 pounds of tritonal 80% TNT with 20% aluminum powder, converted to pure energy in microseconds. The blast overpressure hit 300 psi at 10 meters radius. The aluminum powder created a 2,800 degrees Celsius fireball that consumed everything instantly. The blast wave traveled through the concrete at 1,700 meters per second, faster than a rifle bullet, creating spalling where the concrete itself became lethal projectiles. The support column vaporized. 8,000 tons of concrete and grain began progressive collapse, each floor hammering the one below at gravitational acceleration. The building folded in on itself like a Jenga tower. Total collapse time, just 6.2 seconds. The dust cloud rose 500 feet, visible from Ukrainian positions across the river. Secondary explosions rippled through the ruins as stored Igla missiles and drone batteries cooked off, their warheads adding to the destruction. The Ukrainian pilot nursed his injured MiG toward friendly airspace, holding minimum controllable airspeed on one engine, fighting failing hydraulics every meter. Behind him, the Russian drone headquarters was gone. The hunters had finally become the hunted. Bye for now.